Jung said modern man is the only animal who refuses to become what he is. Every ancient culture on Earth, without GPS, without therapy apps, without self-help books, built the same thing, a ritual that killed the boy and forced the man to emerge. We lost those rituals. And we're paying for it. By the end of this video you'll understand exactly what those rituals were, why they worked on a neurological and psychological level, and how you can reconstruct the same process in your own life without joining a tribe or eating peyote in the desert. Here's what's actually happening to men right now. Record rates of isolation. Delayed adulthood. A generation of guys in their 30s who still don't know what they stand for. That's not weakness, that's what happens when you remove the mechanism that was supposed to forge identity. Ancient cultures didn't leave manhood to chance. They engineered it. We stopped. And the data shows exactly what that costs. Ordeal and controlled suffering rewires the brain's threat response system permanently. The Satirma tribe of the Amazon makes initiates wear gloves filled with bullet ants, the most painful sting on earth, for 10 minutes without showing pain. Marcus Aurelius wrote in his Meditations that he would wake before dawn in winter, force discomfort, and remind himself that comfort was the enemy of character. Not because he enjoyed suffering. Because he understood that the man who cannot tolerate difficulty will be ruled by whoever controls his comfort. Modern psychology calls this stress inoculation. When you deliberately expose yourself to controlled hardship, your amygdala, the brain's alarm system, recalibrates. Your baseline threat threshold rises. What used to terrify you becomes manageable. The ritual wasn't torture for the sake of tradition. It was calibration. The initiates who went through it reported a lasting psychological shift, what researchers now classify as post-traumatic growth. Not damage. Transformation. Symbolic death and rebirth, the core of every initiation, is the psychological mechanism behind identity reconstruction. In the Xhosa tradition of South Africa, initiates are smeared in white clay, symbolizing death, isolated from the community for weeks, then ceremonially reborn with a new name. Nietzsche described the same arc without the clay: the camel becomes the lion becomes the child. Old self dismantled. New self built. Viktor Frankl, who survived Auschwitz, documented that prisoners who psychologically died to their old identity, who accepted the complete annihilation of who they were, had a far higher survival rate than those who clung to who they used to be. Psychologists call this psychological discontinuity, the deliberate rupture between an old identity and a new one. Carl Jung described it as the necessary death of the persona. The ritual gave men external permission to let the old self go. Without that permission, most people stay trapped in who they were at 22, defending a version of themselves that no longer serves them. The ceremony wasn't theater. It was the social technology that made reinvention legitimate. Isolation and silence, a mandatory component of most ancient rites, produces measurable changes in self-concept and decision-making. Aboriginal Australians send young men on walkabout months alone in the wilderness, no social input, no external validation. Epictetus, born a slave, wrote that the man who cannot be alone with himself is enslaved to other people's opinions. Thoreau did 2 years at Walden not because he hated people but because he needed to hear himself think without interference. Research on sensory reduction and solitude shows that without constant social feedback, the brain's default mode network, the network responsible for self-referential thought, becomes dramatically more active. Men in isolation report clearer values, stronger preferences, and less social anxiety afterward. The ancient cultures didn't know about default mode networks. They just noticed that the boy who went into the wilderness alone came back knowing who he was. Modern men almost never experience genuine solitude. We're always connected, always receiving signal. We never find out what signal we generate on our own. Community witnessing, being seen in transformation, is not ceremonial vanity but a neurological anchor for identity change. In Maasai initiation, the entire community witnesses the young man's ordeal. His transformation is a public event. Kierkegaard wrote that the self only becomes a self in relationship, that identity is not a private achievement but a social fact. When you change quietly, in private, with no one watching, the old community treats you exactly like your old self. And you regress. The ritual solved this by making the transformation visible and irreversible in the eyes of the group. Psychologists studying behavior change found that public commitment increases follow-through by 65% compared to private intention. When other people witness a change, they update their model of you and treat you differently. Their new behavior reinforces your new identity. The ceremony created a social consensus that the boy was gone and the man had arrived. Everyone's behavior toward the initiate shifted simultaneously. That social recalibration made the psychological change stick in a way that private resolution never could. Every rite of passage assigned a role and a responsibility, and that assignment was the actual psychological payload. After Spartan initiation, a man knew exactly what he was for. After samurai coming-of-age ceremonies, a young warrior received his swords and his name, and with them, a code. Camus wrote that the absurd man creates his own meaning in the face of a meaningless universe. But here's what Camus left out: that's brutal when you're doing it alone. The ancient rites handed the man a meaning structure built by hundreds of generations of trial and error. You didn't have to invent your purpose from scratch at 19. You inherited a tested one. Frankl's logotherapy, the psychological framework he developed in the concentration camps, centers on exactly this: meaning is not found, it's assigned through commitment. Men who know their role report dramatically lower anxiety and depression scores than men who don't. Not because their lives are easier. Because they have a framework for evaluating what matters and what doesn't. The initiation rite was a meaning delivery mechanism disguised as ceremony. What modern men are missing isn't information about purpose. It's the social structure that makes a specific purpose feel legitimate and real. 3 things to take from this. First, deliberate hardship isn't self-punishment, it's calibration. Your nervous system needs stress inoculation the same way your immune system needs exposure. Second, if you want to become someone different, you need a rupture, a clear before and after, because without a symbolic death, the old identity keeps reasserting itself. Third, transformation done in private rarely sticks. You need witnesses, people who will treat you as the man you're becoming, not the boy you were. The ancient cultures didn't stumble onto these rituals by accident. They ran a 10,000-year experiment on what actually produces mature, stable, purposeful men. The results are in. We just stopped reading them. If this made you think differently about how identity actually gets forged, subscribe. We drop one of these every Tuesday and Friday. No motivational filler. No hustle culture nonsense. Just the deep mechanics of how men have historically navigated the hard parts of being alive. Hit the bell so you don't miss it.